Overthink it. Ready?
I'm ready. Yeah, lay it on me.
Spiritual warfare.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is definitely a loaded phrase.
Right. I feel like for 90% of people, your brain just immediately cuts to, like, a scene from a horror movie, you
Yeah,
know?
totally.
Head spinning, lights flickering, some dramatic exorcism in the pouring rain. It has this really intense, almost Hollywood blockbuster vibe to it.
It absolutely does. It's
Yeah.
one of those terms that carries this massive amount of cultural baggage. For some people, it's just terrifying,
Yeah.
nightmare fuel. For others, it just feels, well, a bit fantastical.
Yeah, like it belongs in Lord of the Rings or something.
Exactly. Not in a serious conversation about navigating modern life.
And that's it. Because of that polarization, I think a lot of reasonable people just sort of quietly step around it. It feels too weird or too intense. But today, we're doing a deep dive into a guide from Successful Faith called What is Spiritual Warfare? A practical guide. And their whole mission, and ours today, is to strip away all that hype and confusion.
Which is so needed, because if you strip away the movie magic and the superstition, the source argues you're left with something that is actually very relevant to the daily grind. It's not about special effects. It's about the human experience.
Yeah, and the guide starts with a pretty bold premise. It says this is a misunderstood and quietly avoided topic, but then it points out something I think a lot of us can relate to. It talks about that nagging feeling of a deeper struggle. You know the one.
Hmm.
You're stressed about work, the family dynamic is tense, you're burnt out on digital overload, and
Mm-hmm.
it just feels like more than just bad luck.
It feels heavy. There's a weight to it that doesn't quite match the circumstances.
Yes. Disproportionately heavy. And the source suggests that a lot of people feel this, but they just lack the language to describe it without sounding, a little crazy.
Yeah.
So let's give them that language.
Hmm.
How does this guide actually define spiritual warfare for, like, the modern person?
So if we look at the foundational definition from the source, it clears the fog almost immediately. It defines spiritual warfare as the ongoing conflict between God's truth and the forces that oppose it, and specifically how that conflict impacts your life, your mind, and your personal growth.
God's truth versus opposing forces. That's a lot more grounded than I expected. It sounds
Yeah.
almost cognitive.
It is grounded. And to back that up, the guide goes straight to a classic text, Ephesians 6:1-12. You've probably heard it before. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood.
But against rulers, against authorities.
Yeah, exactly. And the source really wants us to pause on that not against flesh and blood part. It's a huge shift in perspective. It's reframing those struggles we just talked about. Fear, discouragement, division. Instead of seeing them purely as psychological issues or just, my boss is a jerk, circumstances. The guide is asking us to see that they often have a spiritual dimension.
So it's not just that I'm having a bad day. It's that there might be a conflict over truth happening within that bad day.
Precisely. It's lifting the curtain a little bit to say, hey, there's an unseen reality here. The conflict isn't the person yelling at you. The conflict is the despair or the rage that situation is trying to trigger in you.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But before we go further into what that reality looks like, I think we need to do some serious cleanup. Because the source spends a good amount of time listing what spiritual warfare is not. And I think this is crucial, because this is where people usually get weirded out and just check out.
It is crucial. And honestly, this list is so refreshing because it counters a lot of the extremes we see online or in pop culture. It just brings the temperature down.
Okay, hit me with the first one. What are we not talking about here?
First and foremost, the source says spiritual warfare is not seeing a demon behind every minor inconvenience.
Oh, thank goodness. So if I stub my toe or my Wi-Fi goes down, it's not necessarily a spiritual attack.
No, sometimes you just stub your toe. Sometimes Comcast is just having an outage. The guide emphasizes that we shouldn't become, hyper superstitious. It's not about looking for monsters under the bed.
That just leads to paranoia.
Right. Paranoia, not faith.
That's a relief. What's next on the exclusion list?
It is not living in constant fear. This is a big one. The source argues that if your view of spirituality makes you terrified all the time, you've probably got the wrong view.
That tracks. If the whole point of faith is supposed to be peace and freedom,
Yeah.
then living in terror seems,
Yeah.
completely counterproductive.
Yeah. Right. It shouldn't induce anxiety. And here's the one that I think hits home for a lot of people. Spiritual warfare is not an excuse for personal irresponsibility.
Ooh, Okay,
Well,
say more about that. I feel like there's a story there.
Well, the guide is basically saying you can't blame spiritual forces for your own mistakes. You can't just say, the devil made me do it, or the spirits caused me to be late to work 5 days in a row.
When really you just stayed up until 2 a.m. watching Netflix.
Exactly. Sometimes you just need to set an alarm. Sometimes you need to budget better. The source is very clear. Do not outsource your personal agency to the spiritual realm.
I love that. It's about maturity. And the last one.
It's not chasing supernatural experiences over biblical truth. The source is very firm on this. It's not about looking for the next, high or some mystical sign or a shiver down your spine. It's about grounding yourself in what is actually true.
So the takeaway here is that the source is pushing for a very grounded, almost practical approach. It's not about getting lost in the clouds. It's about understanding the terrain you're walking on.
That's the perfect way to put it. Yeah, it's terrain analysis, not ghost hunting.
Okay, so if we accept that there is this conflict, this warfare over truth, the logical question that pops into my head is, how do you win? If I'm in a battle, I don't just want to participate, I want the strategy for victory.
And this is where the deep dive gets really interesting, because the source throws a bit of a curveball here. A theological twist, if you will.
I love a good twist. What is it?
The most critical truth, according to the guide, is this. The victory has already been won.
Wait, pause. If the victory is already won, then why are we fighting? Why do I still feel stress? Why are we even having a deep dive on warfare if the war is over?
That is the paradox. The source references Colossians 2.15. It says that Jesus disarmed the powers and authorities and made a public spectacle of them. Essentially,